Hey, y'all. I know what you're thinking. Oh my God, not another podcast. And I agree. I'm typically that person that doesn't listen to podcasts either. But my name is Will Johnson, and I'm here to bring something a little different for you. This is the At Home-ish podcast, creating spaces where we belong. Welcome to episode 12 of the At Home-ish podcast, creating spaces where we belong. This has been pretty exciting. One thing about today, as starting off with a laugh, but today is you just get me. It's been really exciting to have some guests on over these past few episodes. I've really treasured the opportunity to get to know some people better because, when I think about my last guest, Bill and Aaron Webster, I see them all the time in the community, but we had never really taken time to get to know one another. My first guest, Mike Simmons, he and I, we talk all the time, and that was a real comfortable, casual conversation. But then with Marco Leas, I see him, but I didn't really know that much. And Susanna Johnson and Mayor Redmond, who I also see, it's just powerful. And, I'm really looking forward to future conversations with people. And I get that some of the people I've had on have been in different positions and have had different titles, but it's really not about that. I like having people like that on the show because it allows people an opportunity to see into their lives and really understand they're human, And so moving forward, I'm still going to have some people in different positions, but I also want, people who have a story they want to share because everybody has a story. I had the opportunity to work recently with Tina Tang. Oh my goodness. If you've not seen the photos from that photo shoot, and it wasn't me, it was her, she did magic behind the camera, but it was a matter of it's Paris Blue Photography. Make sure you look it up. But just to be able to, work with someone and have some professional looking marketing and promotional materials was pretty awesome. I have some different flyers that we're putting out. I'll get some of those on the website soon. I've been blowing it up on social media, and the response has just been amazing, but I reference that because one of the flyers that's going to come out soon has a picture of me on it, and it has the statement, "Don't be ashamed of your story." Because when I really think about equity and inclusion, equity sometimes feels impossible. And I'll define it again real quick. If we define equity as meeting the needs of our, in education, students and families, but equity in the sense of meeting the needs of those around us, if we don't share our authentic voice, then we don't know what that need is. And then it's just kind of up in the air for what I think you need or what I want to provide for you. And so it's really important that when we talk about inclusion, which is about being seen, valued, and heard, that we're really having these supportive environments where people feel their voice can be included so we can actually practice equity. It seems like it might be complicated, and I often break it down to people as just show up for folks. If someone comes up to you and they have a need, we work to meet it. But I just want to really today dig a little bit into my why, what this means to me. This is just a powerful time. We're recording in the month of June right now. And as many of you are well aware, June is Pride Month. And so when we talk about inclusion, I remember having to do some research on what exactly is pride. And to think about years ago, people are living their lives, okay? And they have to hide who they are because how they're living their lives may not align with someone else's beliefs. And how is it that I now have to hide or shift how I live because someone else doesn't believe in that or someone else doesn't want to live that way? And when I reflect on our founding documents, I remember hearing something about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I remember hearing about, no laws being passed to, force religion on someone or, impose their speech. And so why can't people be themselves and live their lives? And so when I think about Pride Month, it's really about celebrating the opportunity to be you. And, and yeah, I don't know how much more I can really say on that because I like who I am. I'm Trent sitting across from me. I love who he is. He is so awesome. And let's be able to show up and be ourselves. Also in June, I used to joke about this when I was younger because I've never been a fan of having to work on my birthday. Thank you for a recent law. I will never work on my birthday again, which is June 19th, also known as Juneteenth. And I do want to say something about Juneteenth. When I was a kid, I didn't know what Juneteenth was. I remember talking to an older lady. I don't remember what the whole situation was, but I remember her asking me how old I was. And I was probably like, 13, 14, something like that. And she's like, oh babies, when's your birthday? And I'm like, oh, it's June 19th. And she says, oh, Juneteenth. And I'm like, no, it's June 19th. And she's like, looked at me kind of weird, you don't even know what I'm talking about. I'm like, well, I said June 19th, and she said Juneteenth again, and I figured, it was just something with how she heard me or would interpret what I was saying. Like I didn't know, and it wasn't until a couple years later when I was in the Army and in Texas where Juneteenth was a big deal. And it's like, oh, this is what this means. And for those who don't know what Juneteenth is, Juneteenth was 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, where there were African Americans who were enslaved in Texas who did not know that slavery had ended. Can you imagine being in this situation where you're captive, you have no freedom, and 2 years ago it's like, no, you can go home now. Like, yeah, it's just amazing, and it makes me reflect on something from Frederick Douglass when he talks about the 4th of July. What does 4th of July mean to the slave? I didn't get that title right, but we can talk about in the 1700s, the Declaration of Independence, where it's like, we'll be free. And you've got people enslaved, like, but not me, right? And so when we talk about Juneteenth, that opportunity for African Americans to be free, and we're not going to dig too deep into it right now. Maybe I'll do a special section later on where we can dig deeper into the African American experience after slavery ended. But even once slavery ended, there were still a lot of freedoms that were denied to people, which, even ties right back into pride, because it has not always been just the color of someone's skin. Sometimes age discrimination, gender discrimination, physical ability, cognitive ability. I was at an event earlier at one of our schools for the transition center, and here are students with, varying cognitive needs who stay in school longer it's like 17 to 21. And it was awesome to celebrate those kids. And we also know that for years, they may not have been included or have been supported. And when I really dig into my why of why I want to do this, regardless of who a person is and how they show up, provided they're not causing harm to people, that's my disclaimer, how do we support them and help them be able to have access to what they need to have, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? So a couple of years ago, I was at a bookstore in Maryland, Baltimore, Maryland. It was a huge, huge bookstore. I was reflecting on why I enjoy going to bookstores so much. I'm that guy that can go into Barnes and Nobles or go into a library and just look at the books in wonder and amazement. And what came across my mind was every book that was on the shelf was really like an opportunity to have a conversation with that author. They're I almost said they're not talking back, but they're telling this whole story, and you're getting to learn a lot about their experiences, where they're coming from, their beliefs, and it's just so powerful. And when I think back on that, there are several books that I've looked at that have really helped me to develop what I would call my philosophy on this work. I've mentioned before, my background is not in ethnic studies, gender studies, or history or any of those types of things. My background has been, aside from being a medic in the Army and growing up in the South, my background, educational background, has been in communication. It has been in special education, behavior support, and then also in leadership. And so reflecting on leadership specifically right now, when I was in the Army, one of the books that we always talked about reading was a book called The Art of War. And when I think about The Art of War, there's a lot in it, but in the beginning, near the beginning, there are what's called the 5 constant factors. And those are ones I often reference whenever I'm thinking about embarking on something. And the first of the 5 constant factors is the moral law. And that basically asks, are we doing the right things for the right reason? The second one is heaven. And heaven really speaks to really understanding all of the factors that play into a situation. The next factor is earth. And earth is more about the tangible, the physical resources that someone may have access to. The fourth one is the commander, which is really now questioning, what is your motivation? What's leading you? And then the fifth one is about method and discipline, which really asks the question, do I have a plan? And am I committed to this plan to see it to fruition? And when I think about that approach in the sense of equity and inclusion, is it the right thing to do to see a person in need and meet that need? Okay, I can agree with that. When we talk about the concept of heaven and understanding everything that plays into it, I feel that's where it gets a lot more complex, because I think sometimes in the conversation of equity, it gets mixed up with equality. It gets mixed up with what people perceive as fairness. And so some people may decide, well, I'm not going to do this for this person because it wasn't done for me. Well, did you need it? And so again, going back into the heavens and understanding all the circumstances, here is a need for this person, this group of people, based on the circumstances for them at that time. Because maybe there was something that, oh, we did this for this group previously. Well, that worked in that situation. And now this one is different. But really taking the time and being intentional to reflect on everything that plays into the situation. And it's difficult for us to do that on our own. We really have to practice inclusion. So I can hear Trent's thoughts because he gives me feedback after every episode. And then it's like, oh, hey, let's go back and do this. He does wonders with editing. It's so smooth. You would never know that, but I told on him. When I was working with Tina a couple of weeks ago, and it's like, hey, here's my thoughts on how you can pose or what you can do. And talking with Joy, for example, hey, here's who you might want to consider for a guest. Here's a question you might want to ask. And that it kind of leads me into when we talk about the concept of heaven as it relates to the art of war, the abandoning of our own egos. It's not about us. It's really about more of that everything that's going on around us. But then the next one, digging deeper into the concept of earth, I feel some of the people around me really have a lot of passion and energy and just want to make the world a better place right now. And you know what? We may not have the means to do it, whether it's financial resources, whether it's the communication platform, whether it's even a clear vision of exactly what it looks like. The struggle to identify the tangible resources and outlets, it negatively impacts our ability to be successful. And I probably should have prefaced the 5 factors with, when the 5 factors are present, it greatly increases the opportunity for success in any conflict. And so if any of those are absent, going back to the first one, if you're doing the wrong thing or you're doing something that may be right for the wrong reasons, you may not be successful. If you're not considering all the flat factors, you may not be successful. If you're not accessing or have access to all the resources, you may not be successful, which then takes us to the whole concept of the commander and motivation. Why are we wanting to do the things that we want to do? When I think about my why, there's this activity, and I'm going to do it in some future trainings. I've done it before, but there's this iceberg, and at the top of the iceberg, it really talks about the things you see on the surface. But at the bottom are the deeper why of what's keeping this thing afloat. And for me, it's really about a concept of peace, not to be all cliche with it, but I really want to get to a space where people don't have to look over their shoulders. I remember a couple episodes ago talking about dating violence, domestic violence, and how we'll tell women to, oh, well, be safe or dress a certain way or, walk with your keys in your hand. And it's like, no, dudes, be respectful. Make sure we take care of people. And so when I think about the conversations I have, my why, my commander, it's really about I want to have safe environments for everyone so that we can go back to those founding words of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness for everybody. And then the final one is that method and discipline. And, maybe this is where I lose some fans for a second. But when I think about method and discipline specifically, there's a couple books that I have, and I'm going to talk about those in a minute. I feel that sometimes in the world of equity and inclusion, people have this misconception that it has to be passive or that it has to be soft. I'm, also part of a group about creating a loving workplace, and the misconception that love has to be soft or love has to be passive. And it's like, no, if I care for you, if I am like passionately intent on reaching these outcomes, there are going to be times where we're going to have some hard conversations. There are going to be some times where we really have to dig into some things. And when I think about some of the conversations which I feel aren't necessarily inclusive, and I'll give this perfect example, which kind of fits my personality. There's this trend, and it's been for a couple years now, and it freaked me out the first time I saw it, with the American flag. I'll say again, I served in the military. I salute the flag. I serve for the flag. But I remember a couple years ago, and even recently, I've seen some upside down American flags. Okay. And when we talk about the flag being displayed upside down, it basically means that our nation is in a state of emergency or a state of distress. And yeah, I'm not going to disagree. There are some things that are challenging, and I can see where some people may feel this concern, and that's how they want to communicate what they're feeling. I'd love to have a conversation with those people. Maybe that might be a future podcast guest, because again, I just really want to work to understand the way that trend also evolved. Was people would have the upside down flag and they record a video of them taking it down and replacing it with an all black American flag. And as a person who often dresses in all black, that's what I'm wearing today. My vehicle's black. I'm dressed in black. I'm black. No. Oh, you got to keep it lighthearted sometimes. But the first time I saw an all black American flag, I was like, ooh, okay, that looks cool. And I think about even football teams. They'll do a blackout game where their uniforms are black. They ask the fans to show up in black. And I'm like, okay, it looks cool, but what does this really mean? Let me tell you. Looking at the historical definition of a black flag, it means that no quarter will be given to enemy combatants, which basically means that if there's an enemy combatant, they will not be spared. And I had to really reflect on that for a minute, because if you haven't picked up on it, there are people who are hanging flags upside down based on political beliefs. And if someone's hanging it upside down and now hanging a black flag, is a communication that someone that doesn't believe the same way as me is now an enemy combatant, which is really a scary way of thinking. And I was like, wow, it didn't sit well with me. I really struggled with that. But then as I'm driving down the highway and I have my music on shuffle, Metallica comes on. And the song was Don't Tread on Me. And when I heard it again, I had kind of a cringe moment because I would think of some of the flags that say Don't Tread on Me. And I would think about those black flags and I would think about that attitude and that, I'm going to twist this for a second, that discipline, that focus, that commitment. And I'm like, hold on, I can be equally committed to showing up for people. I can be equally focused on ensuring that I'm going to follow these plans to make sure I'm supporting, whether it's LGBTQ, whether it's our Asian community, our African American community, our Latino community. We have to have that discipline and show up for people and do what's right and not harming people, helping people. So in terms of the art of war as it relates to equity, when we think about doing the right things for the right reasons, the right thing to show up for people, the right thing to make sure they have what they need to be able to enjoy life. When we talk about heaven, the concept of heaven, really looking at, in some cases, the historical factors that have created scenarios where people may not feel like they have a voice or may not feel like they can show up, or in cases of whose voices may be dominant in a conversation, really breaking that down to understand all the factors that create these inequitable or exclusive environments. Then looking at Earth as it relates to equity in the sense of there's a lot of resources out there. And two of the biggest ones are those things that are on the side of our heads, our ears, because to be able to listen to people, people will tell you what they need. And then those two things on the front of your face, your eyes, what you can see, people will show you what it is that they need, but making sure that we're accessing all of the resources, the earth, to ensure that we're moving equity forward. Then the next one is the commander, and that's the motivation, really understanding your why. Why do you want to include people? Why should people be included? Why do we want to meet the needs of people? Why should we meet the needs of people? Those are all questions to ask when we unpack our motivation as it connects back to the art of war. And then finally, when we talk about the method and discipline, the greatest way to fail is to not have a plan, and so to have an idea of here are the steps I'm going to take. Here's where I want to go with this. Going back to the conversation around accountability, really thinking about how we can remain focused on a plan, be disciplined and stick to it. But going into what I feel might be a lighter note, there are two other books that I reference on quite a frequent basis. And the first of those books is called The Four Pivots. It's by an author named Shawn Ginwright. And I would love to meet him one day. If you know him, please pass this podcast on to him. we can get him here in Snohomish, Washington, and he can see what a wonderful place this is. But there are several key concepts from his book, and it's all about reimagining justice and reimagining ourselves. When I think about the current or ongoing, even social, political views of diversity and equity work, on some sides, you have people saying it's divisive. You'll have people saying it's not effective. You'll have some people saying it's a waste of time and it's actually more exclusive. And I'm not going to disagree with those comments based on some things I have witnessed myself. And we can save that for another conversation. But I pull this up from a website, and it talks about social change is deeply connected to our own healing, reflection, and well-being. And so when we talk about pivoting, there are several areas. The first one is awareness. The second one is connection. The third one is vision. The fourth one is presence. When we look at awareness, it talks about moving from lens to mirror. Often in the conversation of equity and inclusion, you will have someone who looking outward, identifying something that may be perceived as wrong, that may need to be fixed or may need to be different. And what this awareness piece is asking us to do is, before we reach out and want to change something, switch that to a mirror where we're now able to look at ourselves and really understand, how am I now showing up in this space? What about myself, whether it's my education, my experience, my environment? That all feeds into our own bias. There's no thing as anti-bias, bias awareness. But what part of all of those things, environment, education, and experience, lead me to view something in a certain way? And when we can reflect on our own experiences and understand how we're impacting the environment around us, or how, because of who we are, we're being impacted, it can really help us to shift into a position of action to be able to address what's going on. The second is about connection. And with connection, the statement is moving from transactional to transformative relationships. Years ago, I was in a training, and one of the things our organization wanted to do was host events. It was, hey, let's do an event for this, let's do an event for that. And then as we were working with this consultant, the conversation was, you're not being successful because none of you are event planners. And it's like, oh, but then you have to ask the question, why do we want to do events? Events are those things that people can see. It's tangible. It's right in front of them. It's potentially performative, and it's in the moment. But people see it and can say, oh, wow, you did this. So this means you support this, or you feel that this is important. And that at its root is transactional. And we can't always do, because there's only so much time in the world. And the concept of connection, moving from transactional to transformative relationships, is more about, what is the deeper meaning and purpose of our relationship? How, going back to that lens and mirror piece, how now am I impacting those around me? How now am I impacting the environment around me in a way that moves it in a direction where we all want to go? And again, it may vary depending on who a person is, but that takes us to the very next one about vision. So as we're building these transformative relationships, what is the vision that we have? When we talk about vision, we're looking at moving from problem fixing to possibility creating. So, hey, here's the situation where a group of people don't feel safe, don't feel supported. Okay. Instead of trying to fix that, what is it that you want to see? And that goes back to that whole iceberg and the concept of peace of, I just really don't want people to have to stress about if I feel safe walking up and down this street. That's a possibility. Okay. It's not a matter of, oh, we need more police to make sure that folks feel that there's going to be consequences for their action. No, we need to teach people to not engage in that behavior and create that environment of safety. And then the final one is presence. And presence talks about, our mindfulness and how we're our well-being and moving from hustle to flow. In our society, it's really easy to get caught up in, this has to happen right now. This should have happened already. Why aren't you doing this fast enough? But when we talk about flow, it's really about taking the time to take that deep breath in, exhale, and think about, what is the possibility that we want to create? When we're able to do that, it can really help us to reimagine what justice can mean and how we can show up for one another. So again, that's from the book, The Four Pivots by, I want to say it's Dr. Shawn Ginwright. I'd love to have him come to Snohomish I'd love to have a deeper conversation with them. And we actually used this book in one of our schools for a book study. And I was really happy to see how people engage with the conversation, because I really feel that we collectively have moved more into a space of this is who we are. This is what matters to us. And so I'm very thankful for that. Now, the next one really appealed to me because of my military background, my coaching experience. And this is from Shawn Covey, son of Stephen Covey. And this book is called The 4 Disciplines of Execution. Whenever I say it, people give me a weird eye, like, execution. Like, what are you doing? I'm like, no, not that kind of execution. The kind of execution where it's about getting things done. But there's 4 key factors here. Again, it's just something about the 4s. I don't know. But with the disciplines of execution, there's a discipline of focus, a discipline of leverage, a discipline of engagement, and then a discipline of accountability. When we talk about a discipline of focus, there's just so much going on in the world. It's so easy to get distracted and caught up in different things that are happening. But we got to keep the trains running on time, as they like to say. We got to put out the fires when they pop up. But it's also important to identify at least 2 or 3 things that we really want to get done. And that's called our wildly important goals. In short, WIGs. So the first one is focus on your WIG. I really love the visualization of that, because get your head right, you get your WIG on. So is your head in the right place to identify your wildly important goals? And so when I think about the work that we've done around equity and inclusion, I was blessed with the human rights and equity team, where their 3 goals were enhancing student voice, enhancing family and community voice, while also building staff capacity and organizational capacity. Okay, I can work on those 3 things. Those are my wildly important goals. The next one, when we talk about discipline of leverage, is act on lead measures. And the thing about lead measures is we often have the conversation about data-based decision-making, which is so important. If the numbers don't add up, why are we doing something? But oftentimes, if we're focusing on those numbers, the numbers are considered lag measures. The numbers are a result of what was or wasn't done that now gave us this final result. And so when we talk about leverage and acting on the lead measures, what are some of the things that you can now do to better reach the outcome you're wanting to achieve? And so if we think about it in the sense of being in school, hey, I'm actually going to spend an hour or 2 on this homework, on this reading, on some research to improve my knowledge, so that when I'm in class, I can engage in the conversation, which really promotes a lot more engagement in the setting, to when we're now having the assessment, we all are performing better, because on the front end, we focus on those lead measures. When we talk about the concept of equity and inclusion, and a lag measure is how many people live in a certain area, or how many people are hired on by an organization, where the lead measures are more of how are we reaching out to people? How are we welcoming people into a space? What are the conversations that we're having? What are the relationships that we're building? When we're doing those things more intentionally, then it can impact that retention, or impact the people who actually choose to spend more time or spend more money, business owners, in our communities. The next one is about engagement. And the statement there is to use a compelling scoreboard. Depending on who you are within an organization, there's different metrics that you want to see. When I talk with Trent sometimes, and we're talking about the podcast, I really want to know how many people are following, how many people are sharing, how many people are engaging with our content. That's so important to me, where someone else may say, well, how many episodes have you recorded? That's not the data I'm looking at. We know over the course of time, the information is going to get out there, but really understanding what's important to the audience that you're trying to reach. I mean, even in the sense of with merch, People have asked me, oh my God, you have merch. How much money have you made off of that? None. and jokingly none. I mean, there's been a little bit in there, but the big thing is I'm focusing on visibility. I want to get people in merch at this point. I mean, I'd love to make more money. Love to make more. But my thing right now is I want to create greater visibility around the work that we're doing. And so, again, how many people are listening to the podcast? How many people do we see on the street that may wear a hat or a sweatshirt that may pull me aside and be like, hey, Will? I'm like, okay, chalk that up. Awesome. The dollars that, we'll make sense of that later. But are we really making a difference in our community to where people are hearing what it is that we're putting out? And then the final one is the discipline of accountability. And I use this statement quite a lot, and it's create a cadence of accountability. The thing I break down to people with this one is it goes back to that whole concept of being busy, that there's so much going on. It's easy to get, sidetracked and caught up on other things. And then there's also family, and how many hours in a day. But when we talk about a cadence of accountability and we've identified our WIGs, our wildly important goals, really being intentional and asking the question, what progress are we making towards these goals that we've established? It's easy if we don't have those conversations to never get there, right? And so having, whether it's weekly or every 2 weeks meetings to come back and say, here's what we said we're doing. What progress have we made? What's hindering our progress? What are our next steps? And it's not an I gotcha type of scenario, but it's really about, hey, we have this vision that we want to work towards, and we're going to support each other in this work. And even that in itself is transformative. I think about, some of the mind frames around what a workspace may be, and it's, oh, the boss is going to come in and tell us what to do, and if we don't do it, we're going to get fired, right? And so having that shift from, we're a team working together collaboratively to really look at where we want to go moving forward. So I'm thinking about today, and, I'm the only one on today. And so I remember wanting to keep these shorter than an hour if it's just me, because thank you if you've listened this long. The big things I want you to take from the day is if you're interested in doing this work at all, it's really important to understand your why. It's important to access resources that can help you to move things forward in a way that makes sense for you. Because, maybe you'll look at these books and say, yeah, okay, I want to go in a different direction. But this is what has worked for me and has worked for the people around me. And so I want you to think back to, it's not just about you when you're working with people. So letting go of that ego, really focusing on your awareness. How do we now take an opportunity to look at ourselves and our impact as opposed to the world around us? What's our connection? What's our vision? Making sure that we're present, ensuring that we're focused, that we use our leverage, that we're engaged, and that we hold ourselves and others accountable. And finally, reflect. When you do all of these things and you spend all this time and effort and work reflecting on, is this getting me to where I want to go? Now, when I say this work, and sometimes it gets redundant for me because, I say this all the time. I live this. This is who I feel I am. But this work is really about taking the time to understand what community actually means. Understand that each of us, even though we may look the same, that we have different needs. We have different pathways. And when we look different, I think the difference is clearer. But really taking the time to get to know your neighbor, get to know people who are even just passing through, and understanding how we can make the world a safer, better place. This work is about making our world safer and better for everyone who's here. And that takes me to the hierarchy where cultural perpetuity is the end game, is what we're doing sustainable in our society and ensuring that everyone gets home safe. Thank you again for listening today. Thank you so much for the support. Thank you to Red Trucks. Thank you to Paris Blue Photography. We got a lot of work to do still, but so much positive has come out of this. And let me know if you want to be a guest on the podcast. When we wise up, we rise up. Peace out.